social media messages. I think it makes it very easy for people to be misled in that respect. Secondarily, when myself and a host of others initially voted no, we were accused of playing politics. Now, for the many of you who've been here before, you gotta know I'm gonna call a spade a spade. You know, I think we have to be clear about who's in fact playing politics. If you understand our processes for local laws, if you understand our processes for competitive bids, if you understand our processes for contracting and the like, then you can probably determine that this project wouldn't even be ready to move until maybe, based on our past practices, late September, October, which is the end of the construction season. That is a fact, folks. If that is likely the case, then what I suggested before about starting in January will happen anyway, if not later than January. That was not reported, so I want to state that for the record. Despite that, I've had long discussions with the administration via text and or email about what I thought was a major issue for me. Another issue I've argued long before this administration was here, long before 2021 came into play. I argued about ensuring that persons living on a fixed income were protected, initially always relative to foreclosure, leading to sales of properties to the land bank. Unfortunately, again, we were accused of playing politics, despite the fact that that argument has been made, certainly by me, for the last 8-9 years. I question again who's in fact guilty of that. Despite all of that, I'm going to say I had quasi-decent discussion with the administration where an effort will be made to create ultimately what the president suggested. I'll loosely call it, she called it a hardship fund, to ensure that persons who may not be able to keep up with the increasing cost of sidewalks could seek relief, through this fund. For that reason, I'll vote yes for the sidewalk program, but I still reserve the right to amend, which I certainly, I'm going to tell you, the administration straightforward, I don't agree with the idea that we can't codify those protections for people, and so I will seek to amend as much. I also want to state, as a matter of fact, that, I don't think the public is clear on what the ARPA money allows us to spend on, or how it allows us to spend it. I think they've been a little misled. Second, there was a legitimate argument made by councilors about it being fair and equitable. Why would Destiny be paying the same as you, considering that the amount of sidewalks they maintain is much greater? Also, the question of liability, as Councilor Carney mentioned, is a legitimate question. Questions of inspection, who will inspect, but the thing that I heard one of my colleagues mention earlier that was probably the most important is the fact that we're essentially paying for an inferior product with a single pour. I want to quote Commissioner Pete O'Connor, and I'll end here, Madam President. When Madam President, myself, and former Commissioner O'Connor went to Rochester and brought the sidewalk argument back to the city. And it was asked about what Rochester do, whether they did a single pour. They said yes, their sidewalks deteriorate very fast. Pete O'Connor mentioned we do a double pour. Salt affects our sidewalks, but not at such a rapid pace. So I think these are the kind of things that people have to understand when you talk about liability and cost. Instead of sidewalks lasting for 15, 30 years, you'll be repairing them in 4 potentially. And so your costs will go up. These are the things that many of us were saying had to be ironed out before we voted this onto the agenda. But once again, we were accused of doing something other than doing our job and acting as fiduciary agents. So I just ask, as I always ask, let's make sure we understand the detail of what we're saying. Let's make sure we're not misleading people, for, show, for performance, or for clicks, with all due respect. And if it's our intent to empower people, and I always make the statement that government should not be predatory, but oftentimes we seem that way. There seems to be no real concern for ensuring that families are stable. It's all about headlines right now, unfortunately. So I'll be voting yes, but I reserve the right to amend, as I stated before. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilor Hogan.
Thank you, President Hudson. This is probably one of the most difficult votes I've contemplated since I've been back on the council. Having a long experience in city government, I know what the city council is supposed to do, and we're supposed to pass legislation. But we also make a lot of, we have a lot of questions about logistics. And in the end, those logistics of how a program works is dependent on the administration that's got to administer it. Yesterday was June 6th, it's commemoration of D-Day, and that had me thinking about World War II and a certain refrain from that time, called a wing and a prayer, which means that basically you're not sure of something. You're not sure if the resources are going to be there to meet what you need to meet, the needs of a program. So I am going to vote for this, but I'm looking at the administration right now, and I'm saying that it's all up to you now, totally up to you to make this thing work for the citizens of the city of Syracuse. Some of us councilors have got calls, and this is one of the reasons I'm voting for it, from people in, say, neighborhoods that are under stress already. And when somebody on Tioga Street gets a sidewalk condemned for $20,000, it means a lot more than it does to somebody in Sedgwick. And I've had to take those calls before, and right now our system does not work for those folks down there. You know, we allowed them to put on their tax bills for 10 years. That doesn't cut it for somebody sometimes in some of these neighborhoods. So I'm giving the administration a chance. And I know the counselors on this. I respect every single counselor in here. We went around on this program for a long time, and we've talked about it. And I know we're going to be getting calls, and we're going to be sending those calls to the administration. We'll want answers as we go along on this program. And just like Councilor Bay says, we will reserve the right to amend this program. So I will be voting yes. Thank you, President Hudson.
Thank you.
Any more discussion? None? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Madam President. Councilor Bay?
Yes.
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 No. Yes.
Councilor Majoke?
No.
Councilor Allen? Councilor Driscoll?
Yes.
7-2.
Hey, there's always one.
Alrighty. I have item number 10. I would like to introduce it and urge its adoption. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I just want to say I'm so glad we're not doing a single voice vote anymore. Sorry about that, Mike.
Since you want to push buttons, it's your turn.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Madam President, I have items number 11 through 15. Items 11, 12, and 13 was the subject of our public hearing. All those items are ready. I'd like to introduce them as their adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 11. Are there any objections? Discussion? Councilor.
Thank you, President Hudson. You know, one of the great things about being a city councilor and the gratifying things is you meet people that really love their neighborhood and are willing to fight for it. As we saw by this public hearing, this has been a long, torturous process for a developer, for somebody who's committed to a neighborhood like the North Side. And I believe in that iconic bill, and I can't wait to see what you're going to do with it, Irfan. So I will urge all my councilors to vote in the affirmative of this. You know, too often the city of Syracuse is accused of being a tough place to do business, and you know what? Sometimes that's earned. But fortunately, we have city councilors up here that recognize that and are going to vote in the affirmative for your projects. So, thank you, President Hudson.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Please call the roll.
11, all in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Item 12. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 13. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Item 14. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous.
Item 15, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous.
Counselor Green.
Thank you, Madam President. I have items 16 through 21. I'd like to introduce them and urge their adoption.
Item 16, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Counselor Bay.
Yes.
Counselor Green.
Yes.
Counselor Piniagua.
Yes.
Counselor White.
Yes.
Counselor Carney.
No.
Counselor Hogan.
Yes.
Counselor Majoke.
No.
Counselor Allen.
Yes.
Counselor Driscoll.
Yes.
16 is adopted by a vote of 7 to 2.
Item 17, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Yes, Madam President. Counselor Bay.
Yes.
Counselor Green.
Yes.
Counselor Piniagua.
Yes.
Counselor White.
Yes.
Counselor Carney.
No.
Counselor Hogan.
Yes.
Counselor Majoke.
No.
Counselor Allen.
Yes.
Counselor Driscoll.
Yes.
17 is adopted. 7.
Item 18, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 19, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 20, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 21, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Counselor Carney.
Thank you, Madam President. I have items 22 through 35. 22 is going to be held for a public hearing June 21st. 23 through 35, all those items are ready, so I'd like to introduce them and urge their adoption.
Thank you. Item 22 is being held. Item 23, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 24, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 25, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 26, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 27, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 28, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 29, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 30, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 31, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 32, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 33, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 34, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 35, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Counselor Hogan.
Thank you, President Hudson. I have items 36 through 55. I'd like to introduce and urge their adoption.
Item 36. Are there any objection? Discussion? Please call.
Aye.
37. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Item 38. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
39. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 40. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 41. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 42. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 43. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 44. Objection? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 45. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 46. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 47. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 48. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 49. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 50. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 51. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 52. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 53. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 54. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 55. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Counselor Majok.
Thank you, Madam President. I have item 56 and 57. They are all ready. I would like to introduce them and urge for their adoption.
Item 56. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 57. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Counselor Allen.
Thank you, Madam President. I have items 58 through 78. I would like to hold items 66, 67, and 68. All other items are ready.
Item 58. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Item 59. Are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's It's unanimous.
Item 60, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
61, are there any objection? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Item 62, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Item 63, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
64, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Item 65, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Item 66, 67, and 68 are being held. Item 69, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Item 70, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll. Item 71, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
It's unanimous.
Item 72, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll. Item 73, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Item 74, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Item 75, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Item 76, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Item 77, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
Item 78, are there any objections? Discussion? Please call the roll.
Aye.
We have now concluded. I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
Thank you.